This is not the level of efficiency that I'm used to. Normally something like this would take me a day or two max, and I've been working on this area and fuel cell work for a week now. Now, for those of you watching, sitting at home, thinking that everything I touch turns to gold and it just magically goes together without any hiccups, this is proof positive that I too am human when it comes to building things. So, what you see right here in all its ugly glory took me about a week to complete. So sometimes I get sidetracked with little projects here and there, and this is definitely one of those things. I've wanted to get the fuel system sorted a little bit better than it was originally. See, the fuel cell didn't have a baffle in it, which led to sloshing issues. So I made a baffle for that and then put it where I thought it should go, welded or tacked that all in. That was a fun and enjoyable process, except for the fact that I was TIG welding inside of the 4.5 inch or 4.25 inch opening from the top of the fuel cell because I didn't want to cut the top off and then rebuild the whole thing back together. So this is the kind of things that you run into when you buy used parts thinking you're saving money. See, I didn't have at the time that I acquired this fuel cell the money to go out and buy a brand new fuel cell. So I found this one on Craigslist back in the day, like 10 years ago, and it came with a bunch of ugly red and blue AN fittings and a whole bunch of other stuff. I think I paid like $100 for everything. I thought that was a good deal at the time, but now I'm slowly realizing that sometimes good deals aren't so good. And in fact, they're terrible decisions when you start facing them in the future with the reality of the situation. And the reality of this situation is this fuel cell came with no foam. So I've been dealing with a fuel sloshing issue since I've had it. What happens when you brake is all the fuel pours to the front of the fuel cell because there's no internal baffling. So I wanted to fix that issue because once you're down to about 1/4 to 1/3 of a tank and you stop abruptly, there's a momentary slosh of fuel which goes away from the pickup, which allows the fuel pump to suck air. So that's not good. That's not something you want. The other issue was the fuel return line. Now, any fuel return line, if you do have a return setup, which this one does, I'm running enough gallons per hour through this one to warrant having a return line. So I have a -8 line feeding the fuel pump all the way up to the regulator, and then any excess pressure that's not sent to the carburetor gets sent back to the tank. So that return line you want below the fuel level. Away from the fuel pickup. So I have 2 outlets here on the bottom of the sump. Easy thing to think about would be to run the return line right next to the fuel pump, but that creates turbulence, and that's potentially air-inducing turbulence, even though it's under a sealed system. So you don't want that. You want that pickup, or you want the return line to be routed as far away from the pickup as possible. And so that meant running it in the top. Now it also does have a rollover safety vent tube on the top as well with a check valve and everything. That way, in the event of a rollover, it's not pouring inside of the cabin. So looking at all that, there was one glaring major issue in that the return line in this fuel cell did not have a pickup tube that dropped to the bottom of the tank. I ended up sourcing the parts from McMaster-Carr, just some little aluminum tubing, and then machined out a little aluminum fitting, tacked that on, or welded it completely on, and then ground that to where I could barely remount the pickup point where the AN fitting screws in, to where when I drop that tube in, it'd be 1/2 inch from the bottom, and it would basically be wedged in there and be a pickup return tube that would go below the fuel level. If it's above the fuel level like this one was, which is just a fitting in the top of the fuel cell, what happens is 2 major things. One thing that happens is you're dropping fuel, pressurized fuel, even though it's running a lot lower pressure. It's like turning a water faucet of fuel on, and you're dropping it into a sink of fuel below that. So what occurs when that happens is foam, and that's not what you want. You don't want your foam, you don't want your fuel to be foaming or creating bubbles or entrapping air in and around that mix all the time. You will get to a fuel level as you're driving to where there's bubbles everywhere in your foam, and then you lead to the same issue we had with the fuel slosh, which is the pump starts sucking air, even with 1/4 to 1/3 of a tank. That's not something you want. The other issue is potential static electricity. Anytime you drop fuel through open air, molecularly, atomically, however you want to scientifically go about discussing that, the potential for static electricity exists when you're dropping fuel through air over the top of a fuel cell. So that's not something you want. Sparks and fuel don't go good. So I wanted to fix that, built a pickup tube, got it all in there. That went good. Built a baffle system for it. Tigging that inside of the fuel cell was loads of fun, let me tell you. So then I came and made this little mount just off some 1/8 inch aluminum bracketry that I made. Everything fit up perfect. I ordered the fuel filters. Now this is a 100 micron filter for the pre-pump, And then we have a 10 micron filter for the post pump. You don't really need 10 microns for a carburetor setup, but there's always the potential of fuel injection in the future. So I wanted to go ahead and buy the filter that I needed potentially for the future. I didn't want to get a 40 micron post pump filter now and then have to buy a 10 micron later. This pump can pump plenty of pressure through this 10 micron, so I'm not worried about overloading the pump or decreasing the pressure output or anything of that nature. So I've got dash 8 line running to an ugly red and blue fitting. All of this stuff is going to be replaced in the future with PTFE hose at a later date. So I'm not really worried about how it looks right now. I'm more concerned about the functionality. So I've got the dash 8 line running into the 100 micron pre-filter pump, and then this ugly fitting, and then the Holley black pump, which is a 140 gallon per hour pump. It's really loud, it's really noisy, and in an effort to quieten that down, we've got rubber insulators on literally everything we're bolting on and through this little bracket setup. Then I got another 90-degree fitting here, and then it goes into the 10 micron pump, and then another 90-degree fitting up here, up to the original AN, or the AN line that I installed years and years ago. That goes all the way to the regulator. And then the next issue crept up, which is all of that beautiful bracketry actually hits the original exhaust. I had to drop the exhaust to get it out of the way so I could actually build all this stuff. Everything was looking perfect and matching up amazingly. The length of the hose was right. All the angles were good. And then I go try to put the exhaust on, and lo and behold, they're running into each other. So now I've got to, my plan of action now is to go ahead and extend this about 2 3/4 inches towards the rear. I'm gonna lock this side of the bracket off. We're gonna drill 2 new holes. I'm gonna weld a 2 3/4 inch section on this side of the bracket and just kind of shift everything. The problem with re-drilling all these holes and moving everything down is I've already got rib nuts where I want them. So I don't really want to have exposed rib nuts to make it look ugly and then have to drill 2 more holes this way, 2 more holes this way. I think it would just be easier to weld something on and extend it and drill 4 more holes for the mounting points. And then I've got to build another L-shaped bracket that comes up this way anyway, so I can mount the actual billet connector to hard mount this fuel pump to this whole insulated, isolated, rubber mounted bracket as well. Just like you see here, I've got one already. We're gonna do the same thing here. That way these things don't vibrate and loosen up the fittings over time. So I think instead of moving everything down like I was talking about earlier, I'm just gonna extend this, lop this off, drill 2 more holes, drill 2 holes, and then build an L bracket and weld that on anyway. I think that will be a better solution. I may be wrong, because I've been wrong pretty much on this entire project. This is not the level of efficiency that I'm used to. Normally something like this would take me a day or 2 max, and I've been working on this area and fuel cell work for a week now. That's what happens when you go to order parts. You wait a couple days for them to come in, and then you realize you need some more parts, so you order those, and you wait a couple days for those to come in, and that's pretty much the situation here. So I had to order the filler tube from McMaster Car, wait a day for that to come in, order the fuel filters and the bracketry and the mounts, wait 2 or 3 days for that to come in, and then it came here and I realized I didn't have the proper fittings for it. So that's what happens. You got to deal with the ups and downs. That's building cars. That's coming up with solutions on your own. And you got to persevere. So let's persevere. Let's make this thing what it's supposed to be, which is a working fuel pump setup that won't drive you out of the car for how loud it is. So let's get busy. pump is on, the bracket is finished, and everything is the way it should be. I've got rubber insulators pretty much in between the fuel cell frame and that flat plate mounting bracket, as well as another 1/4 inch rubber insulator between the bracket and the fuel filter, as well as the pump. So there's about a 1/2 inch total in rubber insulation, plus everything is dashed AN flexible line. There's no hard line on this car whatsoever. So it should be a lot quieter than it was before. Plus we fixed the cavitation issue with the clogged fuel filter, and that was the main reason we were losing fuel pressure up front after about a 30-minute drive. Yeah, don't want to show the name brand, but this was the fuel filter on there before, and all I do is this come apart, and there's a little disc that fits in on the inside of that, and it's about 1 inch round, and it had some trash in it, so it was a little dirty. It's a 40 micron filter before the pump, so that's not what you want. That's actually going to slow down the flow and starve the pump, and that's kind of what was going on, as well as the trash was starving it even more. So we've got all that fixed. We've got a 100 micron filter on there. It's a 175 gallon per hour filter, whereas this is a lot less, shall we say. So 175 gallon per hour, 100 micron filter pre-pump, and then the 140 gallon per hour Holley black pump. It's a vane rotor style pump. They are loud, but if yours is abnormally loud like mine was, obviously I don't have any insulation or sound deadening material in the car. It's going to be louder than normal. However, it was insanely loud. It was drowning out the sound of the engine, which is way too loud. So we fixed that. We put a proper pre-filter in there, and then I added on a relay to the pump, which supplies full amperage to the pump at any given time. So it is on a relay now. It's a switched ignition keyed relay. Instead of sending that power through the little bitty line all the way back to the pump, we've got a much bigger line going through a relay from the battery straight to the pump. So it's getting full voltage, which is another reason it should be a lot quieter. After that, we've got 175 gallon per hour, 10 micron Holley Billet fuel filter, and then it goes into the dashed 8 line all the way up to the fuel pressure regulator that I just rebuilt. So we shouldn't have any issues. Everything's ready to go, and the only thing left to do right now is to leak check it. So fingers crossed. Let's go buy some fuel and pour it in and see if we got any seepage. It's still loud. So all that was pretty much for nothing, because that's obnoxious. So thanks for joining me on this episode. On next episode, we're going to be putting in an in-tank fuel pump on our 1974 Datsun 260C. If you like this stuff, click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions, leave a comment below if you can hear me. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing and turn on your bell notifications. That way you get notified just as soon as I get around to posting the next video. I appreciate it as always, and until next time, thanks for watching this one.